평화자 남자 균두나이 이제
So as usual, we will start by reciting Refuge and Bodhicitta in order to set the motivation, continue with the 100 deities, Ganteng Lagema, and then offer the mandala. Geshe says, I don't want to talk a lot, introduction and so forth, because that takes time. And actually, time is very precious. You're all very busy. You all have to work and have many responsibilities. So the fact that you can put aside some time to come here in this class to learn something new is remarkable. And Geshe says, I rejoice that you make the time to come here. So let's not waste any more time. So we started last week with giving the definition of the color, and the thing is that when a definition is given, it is very good to reflect on this. We really have to spend some time thinking, analyzing those definitions. If you reflect on something, if you think about something, then naturally it will improve, like your understanding will improve, your position will improve, you go forward. If you don't analyze, if you don't reflect that thing, you just stay stationary, you stay where you are, you don't progress. Okay, so hopefully you have spent some time thinking about the definition and you've come here with interest to see what new material will be presented. It is like this, like in Buddhism, we talk a lot about definitions, right? And definitions is something that we must engage with a lot of interest. So you must take interest in the subject. So you must have this desire to study, to analyze it, and so forth. Geshe was saying when we're preparing for a debate in a monastery. So usually debate starts at 8 o'clock. And before you go to debate, you are looking at your text, you're reading the text, and in a sense, you are preparing for the next session, that is the session of debate. And the thought that comes in your mind is, okay, let me read, because let's see what new things will come up in debate today, and let's see what new answers I can give in debate today, right? And if you really engage it in like this, in a very dynamic way, you will find that sometimes even in your sleep, as you're dreaming in your sleep, you are analyzing, you are examining, trying to find an answer for debate. Geshe was saying, it's no guarantee that this will be the experience for everyone, but if it comes to that point, is excellent. Even if it doesn't come to that point, just to have interest and engage it will be of great benefit. Okay, so last time, in addition to the definition, we gave the classification, and we say that there are different ways of classifying things, and we mentioned in our last class that we have classification here into two types. So we say when classified, there are two types of colors, the root colors and the secondary colors. So classification by type is one type of classification. Another way of classifying is by means of nature. Another way of classifying is classifying so that you can eliminate misconceptions. And other way of classifying is classifying so that you will eliminate things that are not really it. Okay, so different types of classification here. We say that we classify the colors into two, the root and the secondary. You can say that this is classification by type because we end up with two types of colors. We say it will either be the main or it will be the secondary, but you could say that it is classification by nature because we're only looking at things whose nature is color. And then we say, okay, if you have something who is by nature color, again, you can classify it into subdivisions. One will be the root colors and the other one will be the secondary colors. Okay. Now, there is another type of classification that we can also apply. And this type of classification is the classification clarifying a third option, a third possibility. So we have said here that everything that is a color has to be either a root color or a secondary color. So as you can see, we're only giving two options, two types, two possibilities. If there was a third type of color that was color, but it was neither the root color, not the secondary color, right? One would have to somehow include it. However, here with this classification, so it would have to represent this as a third category, right? But here we have a classification that eliminates a third category. There are only two categories. Okay, so again, in this one, the classification that eliminates a third possibility, there are two subdivisions, that which is only classification in two, and that which is not. So just what I was saying, I gave you here the different types of classification because in the future, you know, many times you might hear in the teachings, this is classified into this, into that. So it would be very good to be aware that we have different types of classifications and understand how to apply this. You know, what is the logic? You know, in the last class, we gave the definition of the color, and then we say, okay, you can take this phrase and apply the same reasoning and basically apply the same part at the end of the definition for the root color, for the secondary color, for the black, for the red, for the white, and so forth. Yeah, apply the same reasoning. So it's very good to be able to apply the same reasoning. So last class, we say that when classified, we have two types, the main or the root color and the secondary colors. Since we have two types, we should be able to give two definitions. So we gave the definition of the main color as that which is suitable to be a main hue, and the definition of the secondary color, that which is suitable to be a secondary hue. So as you can see here, we have two types, and one of them we refer to as being the root or the main one. So let's first of all look at the meaning that we convey with the word root. You know, when you have a tree, right? First of all, what you establish in the tree is the root. And then out of this root, of course, you will grow a trunk, then you will grow different branches, different leaves, flowers, and so on and so forth. But at the very basis, what you have is the root. Similarly, in a house, you can talk, usually we use the word foundation, but what is there is something like that is like the root. So this is what the root indicates. So the root is also the main one. Okay, and then we look at the secondary. The secondary is actually branches that grow out of the root. So just going back into the analogy of the tree, just as you have the root, and eventually from the root, you will have many things stemming out, branching out. You will have many branches. Similarly, here with the colors, we have the root colors that are the main colors, and then we have the branch or the secondary colors. And what we understand with this is that basically you have the root colors, and then everything, all the secondary ones come from the root ones. So basically what you do is you're mixing the root colors in different, in different amounts. And by mixing different amounts of the root ones, you can create all the secondary ones. Okay, so root here indicates something which is the main, but also it indicates something that is the root in the sense that it's the source from where all the secondary will come. Okay, all right, so last week we said the definition of a color is suitable to be a hue. All right, we said that and we all accepted that. So now the text continues and basically it says, okay, take this, so, or consider this. So when you hear take this, It means we're going to take something as a basis and we're going to analyze, or we're going to ask a question about that thing. Okay, so take this. What are we taking as a basis? Suitable to be a hue. All right, this is our basis. It is the definition of the color. We have all accepted that this is the definition of the color. And then it says, why? Why is suitable to be a hue the definition of the color? And then the text continues by saying, because in terms of color, the definition, and that defined the 8 doors of pervasion are present, and also there is a relationship. Okay, there's quite a lot to explain here, but basically it says we can establish that that phrase is the definition of color because of 2 things. Okay, the one thing is that we must have 8 doors of pervasion in place. And in addition to that, it says also there must be a relationship. So the word also indicates, in addition to having the 8 doors of pervasion, we must have a relationship between these 2 things. Okay, so then it goes into briefly referring to those 8 doors of pervasion. That is the first thing that we must have in place. So the 8 doors of pervasion are 2 in terms of being, 2 in terms of not being, 2 in terms of existing as, and 2 in terms of not existing as. Okay, so let's first of all explain the first, which is the 8 doors of pervasion. When we talk about pervasion, we must have 2 things, right? Okay, so the 2 things that we have here is the object defined, that is the color, and its definition, which is suitable to be a hue. Okay, so we say that we must have 8 doors of pervasion. And the first one is about being that thing. So the first one means that if it is a color, it must be suitable to be a hue. The second one is if it is a hue, if it is suitable to be a hue, it must be a color. So these are the 2 out of the 8. We continue. If it is not color, then it cannot be suitable to be a hue. If it is not suitable to be a hue, then it is not a color. So we have covered 4 out of 8 that have to do with identity. If it is A, it has to be B. If it is B, it has to be A. If it is not A, it is not B. If it is not B, then it is not A. These are the first 4. The remaining 4. If I have color, or if it exists as color, then I must have suitable to be a hue. If I have, the next one, if I have suitable to be a hue, then I must have color. If I don't have color, then I do not have suitable to be a hue. And if I don't have suitable to be a hue, I cannot have color. So you see the last 4 have to do with existence. Do I have, does it exist as? Okay, both in the positive and the negative, both ways. So what do we say here? We say everywhere that I have color, in that place, in that occasion, I must have something which is suitable to be a hue. And everywhere I have something that is suitable to be a hue, I must have something that is a color. And when we have this case, it means the 2 of them go together. Wherever they go together. And we describe this as being equal pervasion. They are equally pervade each other. They go together. And similarly, we say, if I don't have color, I don't have hue. And if I don't have hue, I don't have color. All right, so they go together both on the positive and the negative. Okay, in this case, we're looking at the 8 doors of privation, and we see that this principle of equal privation applies to all 8 cases, because we say if it is A, it is B. If it is B, it is A, right? And on the negative. And then we say if I have A, I have B, and vice versa, and with the negative. So there is equal privation in all the cases. Okay, so this is something which is very important in the definitions. Okay, that's one of the characteristics of the definitions. When you have an object defined by the definition, you must have those 8 principles of privation, the 8 doors of privation. So you will hear about many objects defined and many definitions in the future. And every time you hear that, you must bring into mind that the 8 doors of privation are present here when we talk about definition and the object defined. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the definition of that thing. Okay, so far we have talked about half of what is necessary to establish or to justify why this is the definition of color. So the first half was about the 8 doors of privation are certain. They definitely happen. Okay. So as you can see here, when we talk about those 8 doors of privation, in particular the 8 doors of privation between the definition and the object defined, we talk about very important things. It is this, it is not this, it exists, it does not exist. Actually, in our everyday conversation, this is what we mostly talk about, right? We say, oh, this is that. Or this is not that, this is the case, this is not the case, or this thing exists, this thing does not exist. So this is actually part of our everyday conversation. We use this quite a lot. So when we start analyzing in debate with those, about those things, identity or existence, like you can see, these are very important things. They have a lot of weight. Another thing to keep in mind here is that when we use the expression, the 8 doors of privation, okay, that is different from the 8 doors of privation of the object defined and its definition. So here we are talking about the 8 doors of privation between the object defined and its definition. Okay, so we say that this is 50% of the characteristic that must be in place. Now, the other 50% is the second part of the sentence, which says they must also have a relationship of object defined and definition. Okay, so what does it mean? There must be a relationship between these two. The text explains, prior to valid awareness understanding color, valid awareness must understand suitable to be a hue. So here we see that there is a sequence, there is a time difference. We don't understand both parts simultaneously. Our mind or valid awareness must first of all develop a comprehension of what is suitable to be a hue. Once you understand this, then the next step is to understand color. So this is what it means that there is a relationship. It means one comes earlier, the other one comes later. So relationship between definition and the object defined. Okay, so now if you actually examine, if someone throws a definition to you and says, oh, this is the definition of that, to be sure that this is the definition, you must examine and say, Does it have all the 8 doors of pervasion between object defined and definition? Tick. And in addition, does it have the relationship between the object defined and the definition? Tick. If you tick both of them, you say 100%, yes, I agree, this is the definition of that. But if you cannot, when you analyze, if you see there's some problem with one of those parts, then you can say, well, it's not quite the definition, or the definition doesn't quite fit, or it's half a definition, maybe partial definition, and so forth. And it's important to check that everything, you tick everything. So we have introduced 2 very important concepts here that must be in place in order to prove that something is the definition of something else. The first one is that we must have certainty in terms of the 8 doors of pervasion between definition and object defined. And the second principle is that we must have established the relationship between definition and the object defined. Please keep those 2 things in mind, because these are the very 2 things that we have to always check in order to say with confidence that, yes, indeed, this is the correct definition. To say that something is the definition of something else, or to say that something is the object defined by this definition, you must have both of those things established. There is no such a thing as half definition. There is no such a thing as a half defined object. It must be the correct definition. The object must be fully defined by this definition, 100%. Otherwise, you cannot actually, in logic and debate, you cannot really use the term definition and object defined unless it's 100%, waterproof, 100%, accurate as it should be. Okay, we have said here that we should be able to apply the same logic. We have given the example of how the 8 doors of certain pervasion between object definition and object defined, and relationship between definition and object defined are applied between the color and that's suitable to be a hue. Now, we have said that colors, there are 2 types of colors, the root colors and the secondary colors. So now we should be able to use this principle to analyze and establish that the definition of the root color is that which is suitable to be a root hue. Okay, so again, we have to go through this, do we have the door of pervasion? Are they certain? So if it is A, it must be B. If it is B, it must be A. If it is not A, it cannot be B. If it is not B, it cannot be A. If I have A, I must have B. If I have B, I must have A. If I don't have A, I don't have B. If I don't have B, I don't have A. So is all this in place? And in addition, do we have the relationship between root color and that's suitable to be a root hue? If I have all this in place, then we can say, yes, that's it. That's correct definition. Okay. So it is very important here to be able to analyze and give a reason. You cannot just say, yes, it is, right? If you say, yes, it is, without having analyzed and without being able to substantiate it by reason, then your talk, your speech doesn't have any validity, right? It's empty words. Okay, you find yourself cornered in a position and you say, oh, okay, yeah, it is. It's not like this. In logic, we always say, take that, it is this because, and we have to give a reason. So in debate as well, someone asks you a question, right? You cannot just say, you don't know, and you say, oh, yeah, yes, it is. Let's go with yes. You cannot say this because they will ask you to give the reason. Okay. So in logic, you will hear very often this very standard phrase, it is because, right? So it is always followed by because, meaning you will state the reason. It is like this because of that and that reason. Now, sometimes you hear in debate, so, someone pushes the opponent and the opponent says, so you say, okay, tell me, is it or is it not? Okay. And he says, oh, it's mostly the case. It is mostly. But even if you say it is mostly, the opponent will say, okay, give me the reason. Why do you say probably like this, mostly like this? There must be a reason. So again, if you don't have a reason to say why you think it's probably or mostly like this, again, you have no leg to stand, okay? So we must train ourselves in any conversation that we have to always look for that reason. The other person will tell you all sorts of things. It is like this. It's not like this. From our side, we must be thinking, why? What is the reason that it is like this? Or is there a reason why it is not like this? Because we want to find the reason. If we find the reason, then we can move with certainty. Move with certainty here, it means we move towards that which is the actual situation, that which is true, that which is unmistaken. If the situation is unmistaken, is correct, then there is a reason that establishes, that explains why it is this or why it's not that. If the situation is mistaken, there is no reason to support it. Okay, so the lack of reason means you're going in the dark. It's mistaken. You don't know where you're going. Now, one of the things that we mentioned between color and that's suitable to be a hue is that we have definite privation in terms of existence. So we said that if you have a color, if somewhere you have a color, it means it is certain, it is pervasive, that you have that which is suitable to be a hue. And if you have somewhere, if you have something that is suitable to be a hue, then obviously you have something which is a color. And because we have that certainty that applies in every situation, we say there is pervasion, okay, in terms of existence. Let's look at another example. Someone might say to you that it is pervasive that when someone has a hand, or when someone has hands, that person also has legs. And then you stop and think, no, actually, this is not the case, because I can think of people who have both of their arms, but in an accident, they have lost one or both legs, right? Or then someone might say, it is pervasive that if someone has legs, that person also has their arms. And then you say, no, there are many people who have their legs, they're there, but they have lost either one or both hands. In this case, I cannot say it is pervasive. So I have to say there is no privation in what you say, that arms always go together with the legs. Legs always go together with the arms. Okay, in the case of color, and that's suitable to be a hue, I say there is privation. When I say there is privation, it means that there is no case, no example that someone can say, hey, you missed a case here. I have found something which is hue, but is not a color, or I have found something which is color, but is not hue. So by saying there is privation, it means there is no possibility, and no one will say, there is no example, there is no exception that would go towards saying there is no privation. Okay. All right, so Geshe says, I do hope that you come to understand this expression. There is privation or there is no privation. It's an important principle. So to make sure that you get the point, Geshe says, I will ask you a question. Is it pervasive? Every time I have a dog, I also have a tail. So you can see, you say there's no privation because either you can actually directly see an example that is an exception, like you can point the finger to that, or actually you can think, oh no, look, there's a dog without a tail, okay? Okay, so Geshe was saying, yes, of course, you know, in the question of food, there are many things that come into mind that you could eat and they are not rice. So you're thinking, I could eat tsampa, I could eat momos, and so forth. So all of these are examples of something which is food, but is not rice. So there are exceptions, and therefore you cannot say it is pervasive. If it is food, it has to be rice. It can be something else. Okay, so far we were talking about pervasion between definition and the object defined. Geshe says, could you come up with an example that is something else, is not definition, between definition and the object defined, right? Something where you could say, if it is A, it must necessarily be B. Okay, so the car is a motor vehicle.
Yes.
But the motor vehicle, I know
It's not a car, can be a truck.
I know which book you're reading. Okay. Okay. We have given examples of exceptions of things that are not pervasive. So we say if it is a dog, it doesn't have to have a tail. If it is food, it doesn't have to be rice. If it is whatever vehicle, if it is a vehicle, it doesn't have to be a car. Okay, we've done this. We understand this. Geshe says, I want you to think the other way as well. Train yourself to think the other way. So give me an example of, if it is A, it must be B. Not the exception, but the pervasion. If it is A, it must be B.
An eye must have a pupil. An eye is also a pupil.
Okay. The miki to toyarwa, miki to doina, nanola miki nakpo. Gogdus.
Mi yena di mi doktor nakbo de yogo na di nanglo de tula jogi mi doktor yen khang de yor was.
But aren't there people who have lost their pupil?
Yes, many have.
Eyes might have lost it. No pervasion there. Okay, so definitely you understand that there is no pervasion. But Geshe says, I want you to also understand there is pervasion. That's why we want to see an example where there is pervasion.
How about a Buddha is an enlightened being, right? So if you are enlightened, you are Buddha. Is that pervasive?
All right. So actually, you made a point, but you know, this applies in some situations. When you have an Arya Buddha, definitely you say, if it is an Arya Buddha, it is someone who has reached enlightenment. Okay. However, Geshe says, we have room for debate here because in Dura, we say that the Buddha is permanent. If the Buddha is permanent, it means there is no cause that can give rise to the Buddha, and also the Buddha himself cannot generate any result. So if the Buddha in general, right, if the Buddha is permanent, how can the Buddha obtain enlightenment? Okay, so one, Geshe says, I could debate you like this and say the Buddha is permanent, so there's no privation. Okay, so since we're discussing this and we're using here the argument that the Buddha is permanent, Geshe is saying, I'm not sure if you fully understand what it means to be permanent. Permanent is an entity that exists, but at the same time is not an entity that has been generated or created through causes and conditions, and also is not an entity that can change in any way. It cannot transform, it cannot change. Okay, so keep this in mind in terms of what it means to be permanent. Okay, now there is the other thing. We say here in Dura, we accept or we say that the Buddha is permanent. When you can find something which is both a Buddha and permanent entity, then you can say that that thing is permanent. So you can say the Buddha is permanent. Okay, so it's not enough to say the Buddha is permanent, because anyone will challenge you and say, okay, explain this, give me an example, what is permanent in the Buddha? So we say, within the continuum of an Arya Buddha, so an Arya Buddha is a person, is a being, isn't it? So within the continuum of an Arya Buddha, we have the truth of cessation. The truth of cessation is permanent, and that truth of cessation in the mind of an Arya Buddha is also posited as a Buddha. So we have the Buddha that is permanent. And if the Buddha is permanent, the Buddha cannot manifest enlightenment. You could say that the Arya Buddha, who is a person, manifests enlightenment, right? That is okay. But when we say the Buddha is permanent, that permanent Buddha cannot manifest, cannot bring about enlightenment. Okay, so Geshe was saying, it's very good that you are thinking, it's your own original example. It's just that it is a very advanced, the example that you're giving about Buddhahood, the Buddha, enlightenment, it's a bit advanced, right? So for beginners who, maybe don't fully know how do we define those things, it might be a difficult example. So Geshe says, I'm just going to give you an down-to-earth example, okay? Simple. So Geshe says, if you have a human head, is it necessary, meaning is it pervasive, that you will have a forehead? Can you find a human who has a head but doesn't have the forehead? Okay, someone found one. Okay, also, another way that you could explain this is that when the embryo has not fully developed within the body of the mother, right? So at this point, the arms, the legs, the head has not protruded. So when it's still, the little kind of like round embryo, okay, that, because it is conceived, is considered to be a human, but it doesn't have, at this point, doesn't even have the head. So it's a human without a head. It doesn't have the forehead. Okay, we are good at finding the exceptions, but we must find something which, if it is A, it must necessarily be B. Okay.
Let me give you a try. If there's heat, it must be warm. If it's warm, there must be heat.
Okay, so Geshe says, okay, in the ice box, you have a lamp of ice. Within the lamp of ice, inside, do you have heat there? Okay, so Geshe is saying, I'm thinking here about the cold hells. So there's nothing warm in the cold hells, right? There's only cold. So the only suffering you have is a suffering of cold that comes from cold, extreme cold. So Geshe says, I wonder how you end up being born there in the cold hells.
How about all living beings in the human realm must survive with blood or liquid in their body?
Must survive.
Liquid, mucus, the phlegm, everything that's liquid. Without liquid, any beings in the human form cannot survive.
So Geshe was saying, so in effect you say, if it is a human, it is pervasive, that it must have things such as, for example, tears, mucus in the nose, saliva, and so on and so forth. All right. So Geshe says, consider our teacher. Our teacher practice and abandon all types of obscurations, afflictive obscurations, knowledge obscurations, in order to obtain the ground of Buddhahood. When he obtained the ground of Buddhahood, he left behind all contaminated coarse substances. And here we have to accept that the blood and the mucus and things like that are coarse substances, contaminated substances. He obtained an uncontaminated body, free of all those substances. However, our teacher Buddha Shakyamuni is a fully ordained monk, isn't he? So he is a human. The other thing that we describe is that when you reach the ground of Buddhahood, there is no matter. Matter here means something that is made up of from the different 8 types of atoms, right? So there's no material substance. Okay, so how do we explain this? Geshe was saying, I would say that our teacher is Buddha Shakyamuni, is a human because he's a Gelong, fully ordained monk, but he doesn't have mucus. Okay, so Geshe was saying, I'm arguing to you here from the point of view of Buddhist presentation, which actually does not necessarily conform with scientific, scientific presentation. So if we take into consideration like the usual presentation, not including enlightened beings, right? Okay, in society, according to our understanding, according to science, in this case, we would have to say, you are probably right. When we say we don't want to use the word probably, you are mostly right.
If it's a house or building, it must have a roof.
Have you never seen a roof of a house that is carried away by the wind? The building, the roof is gone. Or if you have many blocks of flats, right? Maybe even the top floor is gone, roof and first floor is gone, but the lower floors are still there. So the people living in the lower floors, what? They don't have a house? The house is still there. First, second, third floor is intact.
Well, I try one. Liquid is wet, wet is liquid.
Ice is solid.
Ice is not liquid.
Yes.
Liquid is thick or ice is very hard.
Ice is solid.
Touch ice, also you touch water. So water, when you touch ice, is the water that is the wet.
Okay, so Geshe says no, definitely the ice, when it is in the state of the ice, is solid, is not liquid, 100%. Okay, because you can say we have a threefold division. We have the solids, we have the gas, and we have the liquids, isn't it? So we have to follow that.
Okay. I want to ask Geshe whether this example will work. A shelter, anything that has, basically you need something vertical, something horizontal. It doesn't matter what angle, it forms a shelter. I don't know how to explain this. So you get what I mean? It's not a house, because a house you need to have at least three. You have to have 1, 2, 3, 3 sides to form a house, or 4. But a shelter you only need 2. Because you cannot have, nothing can stand horizontally without any holding to cover your head. A shelter, you must have something vertical, something horizontal to form a shelter. Yeah, so that basically it forms an angle. So it doesn't matter, something that is upright. It doesn't have to be like 90 degrees kind of angle. But let's say, for instance, in my hand, I hold a leaf. That forms a shelter for me. And it can be at any angle. So it needs only 2 sides to form a shelter. But it has to be 1 horizontal and 1 at an angle to it.
But the leaf is only one side, one dimension.
Sorry?
The leaf, you say you hold the leaf on your
Yeah.
hand.
Okay, so I hold the leaf, right? And the leaf is now my shelter, but it doesn't have to be like right angles to each other. So it only has two sides. That means one top and one that is coming down. And that forms a shelter.
Okay. Not very clear. I guess I was saying, where are we going to put this? So does it have to rest on the ground? All right. Okay. So let's say, that's your shelter. Okay. And it's resting on the ground, and you can still see a little bit of gap between them. So, little ants, little insects that can go under there. All right. Okay. Now, what if you dig out the earth and you put that leaf or whatever it is really down?
If it's a moon, it orbits around the earth.
Oh,
If it orbits around the earth, it has to be a moon.
okay, when we have this presentation of the destruction, the eon of destruction, and at that point, the earth will be destroyed before the sun and the moon. So we will have a time where we have sun and moon, but there will be no earth to orbit around.
No, I'm saying if I knock my head on a pillar, my head will hurt.
Okay, if you hit your head on the pillar, then
It will hurt me.
it will hurt you. Okay, might hurt the pillar too. Okay, what about if you hit the pillar, but you're having a helmet on covering everything? Okay, so Geshe says you can see, not actually having this discussion, right? It really stimulates your mind to analyze, to see. And this is exactly what we have to do. We have to analyze, we have to check it out. If it is like this, doesn't mean it has to be like that. If it exists, if A exists, doesn't mean that B exists. So this is how we have to investigate. And by doing this, we will derive understanding. Geshe says, to give you my example, I would say, the mountain over there and the mountain over here, okay? Because these two things are posited interdependently. You posit over there in relation to over here. You posit over here in relation to over there. Therefore, if you have the mountain over there, it means you will have to have the mountain over here. If you have the mountain over here, you will have to have the mountain over there. So cases of dependent origination or imputing things in independence upon each other are good examples to establish pervasions, because if you have one, you will have the other. If one exists, the other will also exist. And, scientists talk a lot about interdependence these days. So these are good examples. Okay, but there are those who say, look, there might someone come and excavate the mountain over here and carry it and take it away. And then what are we going to have? Because the way that we posit the mountain over here is from the perspective of the location of someone who is over there. So the person who is over there looks at our direction and says, oh, the mountain over here. But someone might come and carry this entire mountain, and then you're going to lose the mountain over here. So today, mainly we discussed it is pervasive or it is not pervasive. Geshe says, I hope that you can develop understanding on this subject. All right, so let's offer mandala and then stop.